Hey there! We are the Leadership Lab team, and we're exploring the practical application of leadership concepts and achieving excellence.
We go beyond the classroom. We take these concepts into the wild and learn about challenges and triumphs of leaders applying these ideas in their leadership journeys.
And this is Mastery Talks, the podcast where we bridge the gap between academic knowledge and real-world leadership challenges. In each episode, we dive deep into the groundbreaking research and teachings of Stanford GSB faculty, exploring the foundational concepts that power the LEAD courses.
Join us on this journey, share your leadership stories, and together, let's master the art of leadership excellence.
Welcome everyone to another enlightening episode of Mastery Talks. I'm Yana, and with me is ever-brilliant Juliana. We're thrilled to be your guides on today's journey into leadership practice.
That's right, Yana. And speaking of journeys, today's episode is like a GPS for navigating the complex highways of leadership. We are excited to introduce a true trailblazer in this realm, Professor Sarah Soule. What do you think, Yana, about the impact Professor Soule's work had in the field of leadership?
You're spot on, Juliana. Professor Soule is far more than just an academic luminary. Sarah is the Morgridge Professor of Organizational Behavior and Sarah Miller McCune, Director of the Center for Advanced Study in Behavioral Sciences. Sarah teaches courses on strategy, organizational design, design thinking, and let's not forget that she's at the helm of the LEAD program too. It's basically like having a leadership Jedi in our show.
I couldn't agree more, Yana. And Professor Soule's influence in the LEAD program is like the secret sauce in a gourmet leadership recipe. Today, we'll dive into the LEAD program's kitchen to uncover the ingredients of transformative leadership skills and essential leadership competencies that make the best leaders.
So we're about to serve up some wisdom from one of the sharpest minds in leadership today. Please join us in welcoming the incomparable Professor Sarah Soule. Welcome, Professor.
Wonderful. And thank you so much for that lovely introduction. And it's so nice to see so many people from courses and from Me to We and from other walks of life. Welcome, everybody. I'm delighted to be with you.
Thank you, Sarah. We are honored to host you today with us. All right, let's dive right into the heart of our discussion today, the LEAD program. The LEAD program is renowned for its innovative approach to leadership. It's not just another executive course, it's a groundbreaking program that has, in my view, defined what it means to be a leader in today's fast-paced and complex reality. Sarah, could you give us the backstory? What sparked the idea for LEAD at Stanford, and what kind of gap were you aiming to fill in the executive education space?
Oh, thank you. It's such a great question, and I love reflecting on the origins of LEAD. So, as many of you know, some time ago now, before LEAD was born, there were a number of initiatives here at Stanford, but also at other universities, to figure out how we could do and how they could do online education well. And from that, sort of some of the early attempts, we're all familiar with some of the MOOCs that were born out of this era. And I think what was different at Stanford was something that we often try to preach when we teach too, which is we want to do something different. We don't want to do what everybody else is doing. And so we set upon a journey to think about what it would take to create an online education journey for people that would be global, that would involve not just consuming material, videos and readings and so on, podcasts and so on, but instead also learning from one's peers. We also were really interested because, of course, we're so interested in doing action learning at Stanford Graduate School of Business. We really wanted people to be able to take the material they were engaging with, and of course, the insights from their peers, their professors, the course facilitators, and to apply it immediately in the moment in their organizations, on their teams, and to make it come alive. Now, I think what we didn't know what would happen, I think we didn't anticipate how deeply successful and profound this could be and is to many of the people who have gone through the LEAD program. To be able to take what you're learning, to be able to engage with brilliant people from all over the world with different perspectives, different kinds of ways of learning, different ways of applying knowledge, and to immediately be able to apply that in the moment while doing courses and while being engaged on the LEAD platform. I don't think we anticipated how profoundly that would affect the lives of the people who go through LEAD, as well as the ripple effect through the organizations of the people who have gone through LEAD. And so I know I speak for the whole LEAD team when I say we're very proud of what we created. We're proud that we were able to create something that has that is just different from anything else that's on the market. But mostly, we're proud about the kinds of impact that we have had on individuals, on their organizations, and I'll also say on the world. And I mean positive impact when I say impact. There's a lot of negative impact out there in the world, and I mean positive impact. So we feel really a great sense of pride in LEAD, as you probably recognize and can hear in my voice.
That's fascinating, Sarah. And it's amazing how LEAD was born out of like the need to create something different. And it's amazing how it's grown. So how has the program shifted or changed gears over the years? And maybe are there any particular milestones or shifts in directions that stand out to you? And one more question, and how's AI revolution influences program?
Oh, that's great. I'll speak to a couple of those. And I'll say at the outset, I think the AI revolution, we're in the middle of it right now. How is it changing things and so on? And, so that's hard to speak to. I mean, there are some obvious ways in which AI is impacting education more generally, and that is, how do we make sure that when participants or students, if we're talking about our traditional undergraduate program, how do we make sure if they are using AI, they are attributing the work to AI, that they're not simply just asking AI to do the work for them. They're using it as they would another source, another article, another video, another book, and so on. And so that's one of the things that we are constantly needing to think about. I think the other ways that, as we sort of think forward to how we might use AI, one of the things that we often do is we use AI as a gut check. I'll give you just one example of that, and this is in LEAD. We were trying to think about something that is a goal for us, and that is to enhance our post-program engagement with everybody who goes through the program. And we went through a wonderful kind of brainstorming session, and we spent a lot of time with staff and with some LEAD alums and with faculty, and thought about all kinds of ideas for how we could possibly make the post-program period for everybody enhanced. And then we asked AI, what do you think about this? And the funny part about it, we asked ChatGPT, is that actually, as human beings, we had come up with a lot of great ideas. ChatGPT didn't come up with anything different, really, but it did structure our ideas in a way that was easier to understand. So I think, we're all playing with and using AI in different ways. But those are just a couple of, thoughts about the LEAD program. In general, about the program and how it's changed and what a few milestones are. I mean, I'll say that one, you've seen the figures as well, that it's, we started out with fewer than 100 people in the first cohort. And now, of course, we have much, much larger cohorts. I think that in addition to that, there are a couple of notable changes. One is some of the partnerships that we have with different organizations that want to send a number of people, a number of participants through the program. And that's wonderful. And it's great because we feel like that's a really good way to scale change within those organizations. But of course, we always want to balance and make sure we don't have too many participants from a single organization. So that's been something that's a success, but also something we want to make sure that we can grow to other organizations so that we don't end up just serving one organization. And the final thing I'll say is another major milestone was when, the original LEAD program had, I think it was the first set of courses. It was the kind of traditional courses that we had without all of the leadership courses. And in around 2017, I believe that was the year, we decided that in addition to being known for innovation and organizational excellence and strategy, Stanford, the Graduate School of Business at Stanford, is also known for leadership. And so we ended up adding a whole new set of courses to the program for people to engage with. And those are the courses that are on the kind of leadership side, if you will, of LEAD. And I say side, even though it's no longer a side. I used to think of it as these kind of parallel tracks, if you will, within the broader LEAD program, but it's now completely been merged into one to offer more courses, more variety to everybody who comes to LEAD. So those are a few milestones that I think are interesting.
Thank you, Sarah, for walking us through the behind the scenes of LEAD. And talking about the participants, I'm curious, what about people who walk through the LEAD virtual doors? Could you describe the typical participant? What are their backgrounds, aspirations, and roles they usually hold?
Yes. I wish I could say there was a typical LEAD participant. And I think most of you have seen the demographic breakdown, the wide variety of degrees that people have, how global and from different kinds of organizations and different kinds of roles within organizations, different industries. In fact, actually, I will say that the atypicality is part of what makes LEAD so terrific. And I don't mean atypicality. What I really mean is diversity. We have age diversity. We have gender diversity. We have ethnic, religious diversity. We've got global diversity, industry diversity, type, size of organization, role. It's really, really remarkable. I will say, though, that one of the things that we look for when we're reading all of the applications, and everybody who's been through LEAD knows this because they know the quality of the people who come to the LEAD program. We look for people with some accomplishment, some experience, people who have led teams, even if they were small teams, people who have demonstrated that they are serious about their careers, but also serious about learning. And I think that's part of the key to the success, is that this is not just a credential that somebody can collect. This requires hard work, commitment, dedication, and it requires that people deeply engage with the work, but also deeply engage with one another and collaborate with one another. And so I think that when we think about what's typical, those are the kind of typical parts of a LEAD participant, but we're able to find the LEAD participants who fit that from all of these wonderful walks of life and areas of the world and industries. And that richness, that diversity adds so much to every one of our courses, to every one of our engagements that we have together, either in person or on Zoom or online or in chats and discussion groups.
Wow. Thank you so much for these insights. Actually, the next question was about diversity, but you answered it. So I will just remind everyone to feel free to drop your questions in the chat. So because we will select a few to be answered by Professor at the end, and we're looking forward to addressing them later on. And
then now let's talk a bit about something really important, the GSB Leadership Model. So GSB points out 5 key competencies that every leader needs, I would say. They're like the building blocks of the GSB Leadership Model, right, Sarah?
Absolutely. And I want, go ahead, sorry.
Right. Can you walk us through these competencies? And I'm curious, how do they all come together to make someone really a good leader?
Absolutely. And I was going to say after the first thing that you said, that I think what's unique about our leadership model is that it's based in research. Now, and I mean that quite seriously, because all of us have been in airports or have looked at our social media feed and seen a recommendation for a talk or a book or something on leadership. And I say airports deliberately because I talk about the bookstores and airports. I think they're starting to fall by the wayside since everybody's gone digital, but you know what I mean. You can pick up all kinds of interesting leadership books. Some of them are excellent. They're really, really terrific and have a lot of insight, but they tend almost always to be anecdotal. They tend to be about somebody's experience. They are often, quite good and quite useful. That's not the point. But the point is that what we've come up with for the Stanford GSB Leadership Model is based in research, and research that most academic types would agree is sort of well done, is valid, it's peer reviewed, and there's important insights from it. And that's a little bit different than a lot of the work that's, a lot of the leadership material that you can find out there. And so what I wanted to sort of go through now was just briefly take you through the 5 kind of core competencies. And one of the things I will do as I go through these is I want to draw your attention to the interplay or intersection between all of these. And the reason I want to do that is that as I talk through these, I think what you'll see is that the 5 competencies are connected. I almost, it's almost like they're a matrix, if you will, and they touch on each other and mutually reinforce each other. And I say that because I think as we work on one of these, we are also at the same time frequently working on some of the other of the competencies, which is kind of also unique because we don't just give you a laundry list of things to do. We give you a set of competencies to work on that can reinforce one another in a much more holistic fashion, I think, than we often see in the leadership literature. So the first of these has to do with what we refer to as holistic communications. And what we mean by that, and all of you know this, to be a leader, you really need to have good communication skills. And that means not just being able to speak clearly and articulate your points and your narrative in a way that is compelling and that draws people into what it is that you're saying. It's also your nonverbal communication as well, how it is that you're holding your body, what you're doing with your eyes, if you're smiling or not smiling, all of the nonverbal communication that we see people use. We also talk a lot in our communications kind of modules about how to master anxiety. Many of us have as one of our greatest fears public speaking. Well, what kinds of ideas do we have from the literature that will help you master anxiety so that you can become a more comfortable public speaker? We also spend a lot of time talking about knowing your audience and listening and understanding as the flip side to communication and asking good questions. So when we think about these kinds of features and what we talk about and teach when we're talking about holistic communications, I think it's important to know that when we say, for example, it's important to know your audience. What we're really talking about is taking the perspective of other people, which I'll get to in a minute, is another one of the leadership competencies. We also talk about the importance of listening, actively engaging in listening and understanding and asking good questions as part of communication. Sometimes communications courses talk only about the projection of ideas, not about how we need to listen as well, the flip side. And I think listening to understand and asking good questions are all about perspective taking too, which I'll get to in a minute, another one of the competencies. The second competency that we talk about is decision making. And this involves taking in and interpreting data thinking about different frameworks for making a decision and understanding it's really important to use a framework. Perhaps even more, the most important thing is to use a framework. Less important is which framework you use. We also think about how we can become more aware of our biases, and also the importance of communication of the decision and how to think about how we might clearly communicate what the decision is in an empathetic way. Now, you notice as I talk about decision making, we have to be aware of a lot of different perspectives, a lot of different sources of data when we're making decisions. And to do that, we need to be good at taking the perspective of others. We also have to be aware of our own biases, which of course is related to self-awareness, which is another one of the competencies. And then, as I said, we also have to be very good about communicating our decisions, which goes back to the first competency I spoke about, holistic communication. So the third competency is self-awareness. Self-awareness is understanding your own drivers, what motivates you, understanding what your biases are, being able to interpret and see and interpret how your own actions are landing on others. And also understanding how the context or the situation impacts you as a leader are all part of self-awareness. Now, if we think about what I just said, when we spend time paying attention to how our actions land on other people, we're engaging in perspective taking, one of the other competencies. Understanding how the context of a situation impacts us relates to the awareness of context, which is the fifth competency I'll talk about. And I think also with self-awareness, being aware of our biases, which I mentioned in decision-making, is really, really important. So the fourth competency is perspective taking. And this, of course, is understanding where others are coming from and what's driving them and what their biases and idiosyncrasies are and what their intentions are. And when we talk about perspective taking and the importance of this, we spend a lot of time talking about the difference between empathy and really thinking about perspective getting. And what I mean by this is that it turns out in the research that when we try to imagine what others are feeling and thinking, it ends up that the case that we're actually terrible at that. And part of the reason we're terrible about thinking or imagining how somebody else is feeling is that we hold our own biases about that. And so what I like to say is that we need to engage in perspective getting, which is asking good questions, listening intently, and paying attention to how others are engaging with you, with the context, and with the situation. So you see, perspective taking, if we're doing it well, requires us to be good communicators. It requires us to also be self-aware, so we understand what our own biases are, and it's really important for us to also be aware of the context. And context is the fifth of these competencies that we talk about. And there are different levels of context. For example, we might think about the global context or our own particular national, state, city, county, political environment or socioeconomic environment. We might think about our organizational or even team culture. We might even think about the room in which we are sitting or the Zoom room. And being aware of how all of these levels of context impact us as leaders and also impact the people that we lead is really critical to this. And so paying attention to the context through being both self-aware, taking perspective of others, and also looking outward and looking at these different levels is really critical to leadership. It's also important when we talk about contextual awareness that we also, not only do we need to be paying attention to the context, we also need to realize that we have agency as leaders, and we can change the context. And we can change the context in ways that might make our teams happier, our organizations function more readily, and make for better, make for just a better, more smoothly running organization. So the five competencies, we can take them separately: holistic communications, decision-making, self-awareness, perspective taking, contextual awareness. We can take them separately, but I think that it's really critical to imagine and play with the way in which these all interplay and interact one another, and how they really are a matrix. They're knit together in a way that each of these mutually reinforces one another in a really quite holistic leadership model.
Wow, thank you so much for such a deep dive into the competencies and for describing how they interact together. And but in your vast experience, which of them do you find leaders struggle the most to develop? And could you share some strategies and approaches that can aid in overcoming these developmental challenges?
Yes, sure. I'll first start by saying that in teaching this model for many years now, I think contextual awareness is the one that people maybe struggle the most with, not with necessarily becoming more contextually aware, but with understanding what it really means. And so I think that it's useful to think about, very specific granular cases or examples of it. And so now when we've been teaching about contextual awareness, we often talk about things like, even just the temperature in the room can make people react in different ways. Who's sitting next to whom and why? These are the kind of the situation around them. But also, of course, to do strategy well, we have to be very aware of the context in which we are operating as an organization. And so when I start to give examples like that, people then get it. But I will say that it's also hard to develop. And part of the reason it's hard to develop is that we are notoriously as human beings, not very observant. And so working on your observational skills can help a lot. Watching people, trying to understand what's going on just by using your sense of sight, your sense of hearing, your sense of smell, and so on. What's going on in this particular context, and kind of stepping outside of yourself and looking at that can be really, really useful. I will say in general that so contextual awareness is one that people often struggle with. I'll also say that self-awareness is probably the one that people overestimate the most. And what I might mean by that is people think that they're really, really self-aware, but when you actually look at the data on how self-aware people are, and what I mean by that is from 360s and other kinds of instruments that are designed to get the perspectives of other people about an individual's self-awareness, people they over imagine that they're self-aware. So that's the one that I think that most leaders need the most help with. And I think that in general, the best thing to do, of course, is to have a baseline understanding from a 360, for example, understanding your strengths and weaknesses, and then working with a coach to help you walk through and develop them. What good coaches do is ask good questions and lead you on your own road to discovery and improvement. And so I think that's probably my best advice. The other advice that I always give people, and that I'm very bad at following myself, is journaling. Journaling can be a wonderful record. So, for example, jotting down just a few notes. It doesn't have to be a full diary entry, just a few notes on pieces of paper or in a small notebook about your feelings and reactions after a meeting. And doing this with a great deal of regularity gives you a longitudinal, over time perspective of yourself, and that can help to build self-awareness too.
Thank you, Sarah. Amazingly insightful diving into leadership competences. Also, considering how the rapidly changing business landscape, emerging technologies are influencing the development of these competences, how should leaders adapt them to stay effective? And are there certain competences that have become more important in recent times?
Yes, that's terrific. I would say in recent times, and I'm going to say not only the sort of AI revolution and rapidly developing technology, but I'll also point to the importance of the current global climate, which is incredibly uncertain, as we all know, and rising political polarization in many of our countries. And, to put it simply, we're off to a rocky start in this particular, I don't even feel like we've just started this century, but it hasn't been great. It hasn't been easy. And so I'll say that all of these and developing them in people, young people, as well as people who are adult learners, like those who come to LEAD, is critically important. The ability to take perspective of other people, to listen, to engage before jumping to conclusions is critically important. Being aware of the context, we can no longer bury our heads in the sand about AI, for example. We can't. It is here. It is changing our businesses. It's changing the way we lead. It's changing our families. And we need to rise to the occasion to do this. So all of these, being aware of the context, being able to get the perspective of other people, to communicate clearly and with intention, and to listen. These are, and then of course, to make decisions based on all of the rapidly changing environment. These are even more important than they were 20 years ago, I will say.
Well, thank you so much. It's so important right now. And so just one short question before we move to the next part is, like, we've been talking about how to develop the skill, these competencies in oneself, in yourself, but how can leaders effectively mentor and nurture these competencies in their organizations?
Yes, a great question. I would start by, as a practice, making sure people who, especially those who you want to develop, have access to a 360. They can be incredibly valuable. And then after that, certainly modeling these behaviors as leaders, which all of you are, part of the most important thing you can do is model these behaviors. And then the final thing that I'll say is that, many of you have worked with a coach, a leadership coach. And they I'm a big believer in how terrific leadership coaches are. But I would ask yourselves as leaders, how might you think about leading as a coach, borrowing something? What I mean there is learning from what coaches do so that you can coach the people that you lead. That can be more effective, I think, than our typical way of leading, which often can be very much command and control. So how can you not go out and get a coaching certificate unless you want to? You should do that if you want to do that. But how can you borrow from the quiver, if you will, of how coaches have worked with you to use some of those same tools and techniques of asking good questions, of listening, of leading people from the side as opposed to telling them what to do? How might you do that as a leader?
Thank you, Sarah. So wrapping up what we've got here with the GSB Leadership Model, in a nutshell, it is your Swiss Army knife in the leadership world. It's all about building self-awareness, empathy, situational savvy, and top-notch communication. So let's embrace this model and now move to a wider view of organizational behavior. Let's talk about how company and leadership can create a culture to drive ongoing engagement and innovation. Based on your course, Sarah, organizational design that you teach us, it seems that aligning strategic priorities with organizational capabilities is a key challenge. How can leaders ensure their organizational design supports these priorities, and what steps should they take if realignment is needed?
It's a great question, and that is really the core of the course. And what I'll do is I'll focus on what we do in the course, because I think that there's really something here that can be thought of as good advice to leaders. And what we do in the course is that we begin with, and it really is bringing a design thinking mindset to thinking about organizational problems. And we spend time with with the leaders, getting them to look at various kinds of data within the organizations, some of which might be existing surveys and so on about employees or about different processes and so on. But we also ask them to go and speak to take the perspective empathetically and listen to people in their organization with the goal of identifying something that could be a pretty small problem or issue in the organization. What all of us know is that oftentimes small issues in organizations can cascade and grow bigger and snowball and turn into really momentous problems. And we take them through a process after they've identified what an issue or problem might be. And we take them through a process of thinking, so is this something to do with people? Is it something to do with the architecture of the organization? Is there something wrong with a routine or a process or some task that we could kind of fix? Or is something wrong in the culture of the organization? And then we spend time after they've kind of identified the root of where the problem is, coming up with small wins, small approaches to try to change or fix that problem in a very iterative fashion. And what I mean by that is we're not telling people to pull out a chart and redraw the organization and redesign the organization completely, although it could lead to that. But what we want people to do is to tackle a small problem, see what happens when they design an intervention to fix that problem, and then iterate and try it again and continually be working in a very iterative fashion. For those of you who know the way in which we teach strategy here too at the GSB, it's kind of a similar approach. We treat it like it's a hypothesis, and it is a very agile way of thinking about both strategy and I think organizational design. As the strategy changes, the organizational design is probably going to need to change. And in volatile times, which we are all in right now, strategies are changing more and more rapidly. And therefore, that means that we've got to be more fluid and agile with our organizational designs as well. And so that's kind of the approach that we take. And I think what we try to get people away from doing in the course, and what I try to get people away from doing when I'm coaching clients and so on, is that, oftentimes when leaders hear organizational design, they go right to the org chart. They want to redraw boxes and lines and reorg something. And sometimes that is necessary, but a lot of times there can be small wins and small fixes that can have enormous payoff. But people don't believe it. So I think sometimes when we start really small with something, we diagnose a problem in the organization or on the team, we play around with and creatively come up with some solutions. Then if the solution works, we figure out how to scale it throughout the organization. It sounds like this is easy. Of course, it's not easy, but it is really where the work, I think, of organizational design gets done. And it's a very different model of thinking than the old school way of thinking. Let's just redraw the chart and make somebody report to somebody else. It's much more, it really does require us to use all of those leadership competencies and to apply them to small experiments within organizations with hopefully quite a large payoff.
Well, thank you. And following up on that, so when we are adding or scaling new elements of organizational design, how can leaders effectively manage the balance by subtracting or removing outdated tasks and routines?
Oh, it's such a great idea. And I think subtraction is so important. We can't just keep adding routines and tasks to organizations. And so we need to engage in also weeding out routines that are outdated or tasks that are outdated. And I think what we need to recognize, though, and this is, I think, the key, and this is a leadership challenge as well, which is that, routines are called routines for a reason, and that is they're habits. And if any of you have ever tried to take up exercise or tried to lose some weight or tried to gain some weight or tried to stop biting your fingernails, you know that habits are extremely hard to break. And so what you need to think about are a couple of things. One is you need to recognize that when you begin to change up routines, while it may seem like a technical challenge, you may be saying, well, look, we're just going to be using a new, a new learning management system here in LEAD or something like that. While it seems like it's a technical challenge, what you really need to recognize is that it's not, it's actually an adaptive challenge. And what I mean by that is that with technical challenges, there's an existing solution out there somewhere. And so you just have to figure out what that solution is. But with an adaptive challenge, you don't actually know what the solution is, and you kind of have to make it up as you go along and lead people through the process of explaining to them how the world is going to be better with the new routine or task that you're going to be using. You need to explain to them what problem it's fixing, and then you need to call them to action to actually go and begin to use and adopt this new routine. In some sense, it's sort of like you diagnose the problem, you offer a prognosis of what's going to be better with the adoption of this new routine, and then you need to motivate people to actually do it. That's adaptive leadership, and that's much harder than just some technical thing that you need to fix. And again, because it requires that you inspire people through good communication, clear communication. You spend time understanding why it is that it's so hard for them to change through perspective taking. You spend time perhaps even getting them engaged with the selection of what the new routine is going to be, which gets them to be sort of more on board with it. And then you make sure to thank people once they have helped you with the adoption of the new routine. We don't say thanks enough in our organization, and I think we all should focus on saying thank you 5 times a day.
Thank you, Sarah. This has been an incredibly enlightening conversation so far. And now it's time for our new section of the show. We still have 5 minutes for the Q&A session with leaders. I think we've received multitude questions, and we can't wait to dive into them. Right, Juliana?
Yeah, I was looking forward to this part. It's amazing how our listeners bring their unique perspectives and challenging questions to the table. And let's jump right into it and see what's on the minds of our Mastery Talks community today. And Purnima is our community voice today. Purnima, so what are the questions that we're going to address today?
There is an interesting question from Cassini about leadership agility. Cassini, do you want to ask the question? You're on mute.
The question really is around leadership agility. Hi, Professor. Thank you so much for being here. Nice to see you. Nice to see everybody.
Lovely to be with you all.
Yeah. The question's around leadership agility and how we can encourage that in ourselves and support that, and also utilize our community and help support each other in agility, specifically agility, flexibility. I mean, I think that is a thread that you can weave through the different pillars that you mentioned in this matrix earlier. So just looking for ideas and thoughts and perspectives around bolstering that muscle, if you will.
I love that. I love it. So here's just a thought, an idea. So, you know that I've already preached about journaling, which can be really helpful, because then you get a longitudinal record and you see yourself and you say, oh, here's when I really was pretty flexible and agile, and here's where I was just a stick in the mud. So that can be helpful, at least in increasing self-awareness. But another is an accountability partner. Set a goal with somebody in LEAD or somebody in your organization and say, you know what? I really want to work on this. And by the end of each week, I want to write to you on Friday, or text you on Friday, or WhatsApp you on Friday, and tell you 3 things I did this week, which were leading me to be more flexible. I have found that when you have an accountability partner and you both do that, it's pretty amazing. And then you begin to compete with each other, but you also give each other ideas. You could even have an accountability group, but I think it's sometimes, at least as a start, it's easier to just have one other person. At least I found that anyway, one other person.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much. And we can be even competitive as we,
yes.
That's a positive competitive, in which I have to comment on that aspect. I found this community to be unlike any other academic community that I've been a part of. And it's not this competitiveness in the way that you're stepping on someone's shoulder to get where you're wanting to go, but it's really competitive in the way of how can we help one another. And I have never felt so supported. And so I just want to just put that out there and acknowledge that and say thank you.
I completely agree with you. I think that's a wonderful observation. Thank you.
We will go to the next question. I think we only have time for one more. June, you had a question about AI. Would you like to ask it?
Yeah. Hi, Professor.
Hi, nice to see you.
Good to see you. I think AI is going to fundamentally make us have to rethink how we do everything, right? And so I think it's going to be a huge challenge. And so I'm wondering if you have thoughts on how leaders can help their, staffs and employees make that transition.
Yes, great. So a lot depends on exactly what it is and how it is that you're using it and what you're referring to. But I will say that for most of us, a lot of it is going to be kind of around what we just described in terms of different changes to routines and tasks, and recognizing that this is really a matter of changing how routines of people, and understanding that when we're in a moment of flux, people really need to feel safe. They need to feel secure. They need to feel like we hold them in high esteem. We need to make them, feel like they have some autonomy and some say in the matter and some agency in the matter. And so I think just, recognizing that while there's so much potential, it's also very scary for people, and helping them to, sort of to coach them along. And again, and as I said, recognizing this is technology, but it's way more than technology, because it requires us to change routines. And that is fundamentally adaptive leadership, not just a technical leadership.
Thank you, Professor. We are out of time.
Okay.
Yes. So
Just like
for
that.
the rest of the questions, we will get back to you.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Professor Soule, it feels like we've barely scratched the surface, yet we've covered so much ground.
Well, it's wonderful. Thank you so much for inviting me. And I'm so happy to see so many familiar faces and names. And I hope that I will see you at Me2We.
Thank you, Professor Soule, for the wisdom, for the stories and inspiration. It's been an absolute pleasure having Sarah on our pod today, and thank you for our leaders for spicing up things with your on-point questions.